Back in the early 1980s, a woman named Jane McCutcheon was making dinner in the kitchen of her Nottingham, England home, while her two young daughters were watching cartoons in the living room, while the two little girls were smiling and giggling in front of the TV. There was another face in the room that wasn't so happy. Hanging over the fireplace was a portrait of a young boy around 10 or 11 years old. He had blonde hair, and he wore a ragged-looking shirt. He was clearly sad about something, almost unnaturally so. Tears welled up in the boy's unusually large eyes and streaked down his cheeks. That afternoon, while Jane McCutcheon was prepping a roast in the kitchen, she was surprised when she turned around and saw her 2-year-old daughter suddenly standing behind her, tugging on her shirt and pointing frantically down the hall. That's when Jane noticed the black smoke billowing down the hallway toward her. Jane scooped up her daughter and ran down the hallway. She was shocked when she saw that the living room was on fire. Flames raced up the walls and vertical blinds to the ceiling. Jane grabbed both her daughters and fled the house. Soon after, firefighters arrived to put out the blaze. The firemen burst through the front door and soon were able to get the fire under control. As they dug through the rubble, one of the firemen exclaimed, "Another one!" They had found what a lot of people across the United Kingdom came to believe was the source of many such mysterious fires. For there, lying in the rubble completely unscathed by the flames, was the painting of the crying boy. A painting that tens of thousands of people believe was cursed. Throughout history, you can find plenty of stories of curses and cursed objects. There's a story of the Curse of King Tut, in which several members of the team that unearthed the boy king's tomb died under mysterious circumstances. There's also the Curse of the Hope Diamond, in which many of the people who possessed the infamous blue gem fell prey to a number of terrible fates. But these are both instances of allegedly cursed objects which were considered both ancient and mystical in nature. It's particularly unusual when the cursed object in question is a mass-produced painting that was sold in department stores all across England in the 1980s. That's the case of the Crying Boy paintings, though. In September 1985, the popular tabloid newspaper The Sun ran a headline that read, "Blazing Curse of the Crying Boy." According to the story, Ron and Mary Hall, an older couple living in Rotherham, England, about 80 miles east of Liverpool, became the first victims of this curse. They had purchased one of the inexpensive Crying Boy paintings at a department store a few months earlier. But shortly after hanging the painting on their wall, their entire house became engulfed in flames after a grease fire broke out in their kitchen. What is particularly strange, though, is that while the entire house was destroyed, one item remained untouched: the portrait of the Crying Boy. Ron Hall had a brother who worked as a firefighter in the town of Rotherham. He was quoted in The Sun saying that he had seen this same thing happen several times before. In each instance, a mysterious fire broke out in a seemingly normal home, and each time one of the Crying Boy paintings was found unburned in the rubble. The Sun's article is also where the story of Jane McCutcheon was first recounted. The article made it clear that the one common thread between all these mysterious fires was the presence of the Crying Boy painting, which seemed to be causing each blaze and seemed to be impervious to fire. By the following day after the article appeared, phone calls poured into The Sun from thousands of terrified people, claiming they too had fallen victim to the curse of the Crying Boy. The phone practically rang off the hook for The Sun's editor, Kelvin Mackenzie, who began to believe this was a much bigger story than he'd originally imagined. Mackenzie ran a follow-up article the next day in which he recounted numerous other stories of the alleged victims of the Crying Boy curse. There was a pizza parlor in Norfolk that was gutted by fire shortly after hanging the Crying Boy inside. A woman from Surrey named Dora Brand claimed that her entire house burned to ashes just 6 months after purchasing the painting. Sandra Kraske of Kilburn claimed that she and her sister, her mother, and a friend all suffered mysterious fires after purchasing copies of the portrait. Kraske's sister-in-law even claimed to have witnessed the painting swaying by itself on the wall just a few days before her house burst into flames. In addition to all these people calling into the Sun with stories of the cursed painting destroying their homes, there were also a number of people who claimed to have come up with ways to counteract the curse. Some people said that all you had to do was say nice things to the painting every now and then. Other people claimed you needed to purchase a companion painting called The Crying Girl. Apparently, the little boy in the painting was just lonely. Other amateur sleuths began digging for answers as to why this particular painting appeared to have a curse around it. But the only clue people had to go on was the artist's signature, G. Bragolin. This led some people to believe that the boy's portrait was painted by an Italian artist named Giovanni Bragolin, who lived in England after World War II. The problem was records were scarce about this elusive artist, which led to further speculation that the name Giovanni Bragolin may have been a pseudonym. Another rumor soon sprung up that the boy in the painting was an orphan, and that somehow the childhood trauma he experienced imprinted itself on the portrait that the artist put down on canvas. As the days wore on, more and more people began contacting the Sun worried about the crying boy. So the tabloid offered a solution. In October 1985, editor Kelvin McKenzie made an announcement to readers that if they were worried about the crying boy painting, they could send it in and the Sun would destroy it for them. McKenzie promised that on Halloween night he would create a massive bonfire with all the collected paintings, thereby destroying the curse forever. Or, so they thought. More than 2,500 copies of The Crying Boy were sent into the paper's headquarters. Although Mackenzie didn't personally believe in curses, even he didn't want to keep all these paintings around any longer than necessary. The original plan was to burn them all on the roof of the newspaper's London headquarters. But cooler heads prevailed when it was pointed out this sounded like a sure way to start their own raging out-of-control inferno. So instead, they settled on a field in the city of Reading. On the night of October 30th, they piled up the more than 2,000 paintings and doused them all with gasoline. Then they set the pile ablaze. They spent the rest of the night dumping even more fuel on the fire in order to ensure everything burned. The Sun documented the entire incident. The following day, the Sun proudly announced that the curse of the crying boy was over. But was it? The number of calls to the paper about the painting dwindled over the coming weeks, but even still, there were plenty of questions that remained unanswered about the crying boy's portrait and its mysterious painter. Throughout the 1980s, more than 50,000 copies of the painting were sold at popular retailers like Woolworths across the UK. Some people who purchased the painting claimed they had been compelled to buy it, almost as if they were in a trance. Some people who owned the painting claimed they'd experienced all sorts of supernatural phenomena, even beyond the mysterious fires. Some people claimed to have felt a ghostly presence around the painting. Others said they suffered unusual injuries or witnessed poltergeist activity in their homes. In 1995, a schoolteacher named George Mallory finally uncovered more information on the artist known as Giovanni Bragolin. He learned that Bragolin was just one of several pseudonyms used by the artist, whose real name was Bruno Amadio. Amadio lived in Venice during World War II, restoring old paintings and creating several of his own. According to Mallory, an art dealer spotted Amadio's work in the 1970s and decided to mass-produce it for sale in England. Amadio actually continued living and painting in the city of Padua, in northern Italy, right up until his death in 1981. The artist actually died shortly before his portrait of the crying boy took off in popularity. In the year 2000, The Sun printed a follow-up story about Bruno Amadio, which only deepened the mystery of the crying boy paintings. The problem is, we don't know for certain if this story is true, or whether the Sun made it all up. But so the story goes, back in 1969, Amadio met a little orphan boy in Madrid. This child was very quiet and shy, and he seemed perpetually sad about everything. Amadio felt compelled to paint the boy's portrait. After doing so, he showed the painting to a local priest, who identified the boy as a runaway named Don Bonillo, whose parents died in a terrible fire. The priest warned Amadio to stay away from the boy because he was dangerous. According to the priest, mysterious fires broke out wherever the boy went. In fact, it happened so often, the child had earned the nickname Diablo. But supposedly Amadio ignored the priest's warnings and decided to adopt the boy for himself. For a while, the boy seemed to bring Amadio nothing but good luck. His art career soared for a little while there, but then things took a turn for the worse when Amadio's studio caught fire. Amadio blamed the boy. Don Bonillo ran away once again after that, and Bruno Amadio never saw him again. Not long after, Bruno Amadio's luck turned sour. After the fire, no one wanted anything to do with him or his work. He had gained a reputation as someone who was somehow tainted by the curse. That's why he began selling his work under so many different pseudonyms. As for what actually happened to the boy, we don't know for certain. But one story claims that in 1976 a car exploded just outside of Barcelona, killing the driver. The 19-year-old who was killed in the fiery wreck was named Don Bonillo. Over the years, many paranormal investigators have studied the case of the Crying Boy paintings, trying to determine if there really was a curse or not. In 2010, comedian Steve Punt staged a publicity stunt in which he took one of the Crying Boy portraits to a psychic medium named Annie Mills and a Wiccan high priest named Sir Ralph Harvey. Mills claimed that she sensed the boy in the painting died young in a fire. She also claimed to have no prior knowledge of the Crying Boy paintings or its alleged curse. Harvey claimed he could perform an exorcism that would rid the painting of its negative energy forever. Now, that would all be great if the curse were real. But, you see, there's one big problem with the alleged curse of the Crying Boy painting. That's the fact that there's actually more than one Crying Boy. It turns out Amadio painted a series of crying children, and they're all different, including a crying girl. The Sun downplayed this little fact when they spread the stories about the Crying Boy's curse, probably because if that little detail were to get out, it would diminish the idea that there really was a single cursed child in the portrait. After that, it becomes a little more difficult to believe in the curse when you realize all the portraits are of different kids. In fact, some of the paintings of crying children that were sold into British department stores weren't even all done by Bruno Amadio. Once Amadio's original Crying Children series took off in popularity, several similar-looking knockoffs began being sold as well. Taking all that together, it seems much more likely the Sun merely preyed upon people's fears in order to sell more papers. There is a term for this particular type of widespread fear and paranoia. The clinical term is a mass psychogenic illness, and large numbers of people have experienced them over the centuries. In 1518, a bizarre dancing plague broke out in Strasbourg. Throughout that summer, as many as 400 people literally danced themselves to death in the streets. In the case of the Crying Boy painting, most skeptics of the curse believe that a similar level of mass hysteria spread throughout England, causing people to irrationally connect seemingly ordinary house fires caused by electrical problems, cigarette burns, and other common causes with the Crying Boy paintings. Statistically speaking, there doesn't appear to be any real correlation to the number of house fires that occurred throughout the 1980s to the number of Crying Boy paintings people owned. Naturally, if more than 50,000 of the paintings were sold, then at least a few of them would end up in homes that caught fire through normal accidents. For example, Jane McCutcheon had her copy of the Crying Boy hanging over an open fireplace. But one thing this doesn't explain is why the paintings wouldn't burn, even when the rest of the house went up in flames. Even the Sun had problems burning the paintings. Early tests with setting the paintings on fire did little damage initially. The tabloid's editors were only able to get the paintings to burn after continually dousing them with gasoline over an entire night. Comedian Stephen Punt may have come up with an answer to the Crying Boy's seeming inability to burn as well. He took one of the paintings to a lab to be tested. There they determined that the portrait was coated in a fire-retardant material. The one part of the painting that was not fire-resistant, though, was the string at the back. When the painting was exposed to flames, the string would break, sending the painting toppling face down to the floor, protecting it even further from the flames. So, that's that. And a mystery, right? A combination of mass hysteria and some fire-retardant materials were all it took to create the urban legend about the curse. Or, on the other hand, maybe not. In July 2010, another British tabloid, The Star, published a news article in which they interviewed a man named Stan Jones, who claimed to be the latest victim of the Crying Boy painting's curse. And in fact, it wasn't the first time this happened to him either. Jones told the tabloid that his house in Rotherham burned to the ground shortly after he purchased a copy of the Crying Boy at a flea market a few years earlier. What's really bizarre, though, is that Jones claims that this was the third house he has owned that has burned to the ground. And in each one of those homes, he had a copy of the Crying Boy hanging inside. Thanks so much for checking out this video. If you like this content and want to see more like it, please click the subscribe and bell icons to be notified when new videos go up.